From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO. I'm Erin O'Toole.
I'm very strict, but I don't believe in hitting. But sometimes when they hit each other, I root for different teams.
When she's on stage, comedian Zoe Rogers talks about what she knows best, her kids.
I say what you're supposed to say. We use our words, not our hands. But what I'm thinking is very different. Like my inner monologue at that moment is usually just like, sweep the leg. Finish him.
Now, offstage, Zoe appreciates a stand-up routine that's a genuine reflection of the comedian's perspective. So, in addition to her own stand-up act, Zoe focuses on booking comedy shows in Boulder that focus on diverse performers. Zoe organizes the Boulder Comedy Festival. This year's festival kicked off on Wednesday and continues through Sunday. Zoe Rogers joins us now to talk about the lineup, as well as her own comedy. Zoe, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So before you created the Boulder Comedy Festival, you got some attention a few years back with a comedy event you booked in LA called the Token Straight White Dude Show.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the concept and how it went over.
Well, that came out of the fact that at the time I realized there was a real lack of women and a lack of diversity in the shows that were being booked. And so I was frequently the only woman on a show. And if it was a monthly show, my friends and I who were women in comedy would say like, oh, well, if you're on it, we're clearly not going to be on it because they only have one woman a month. And so I tried to flip that idea on its head and was like, what if there was this token spot for a straight white male comic? And that's where Token Straight White Dude came from. And it really allowed us to book a lot of very funny and diverse voices while also sort of having this spot that became this coveted thing where people would email me, comics would be like, can I be your straight white dude for February? You know, like it became this spot that was a little bit of fun because everybody knew there was a lack of diversity. And so there was some pushback to me from people about it. And they would say like, well, how would you feel if I called a show only one woman? And I was like, well, that's what your shows are. You're just not calling them that. At least I'm calling out the secret of the room in the name of the show. But yes. The reception was good. There were lots of audience people who came out to that wouldn't typically come out to comedy. And they would talk to me afterwards and say, I sort of stopped going to comedy clubs because it didn't resonate with me. It felt very one-sided. It felt very mean. And this didn't feel like that. Finding a venue was a trickier thing because I worked with a bunch of venues at the time and I pitched the show to them. And they knew me. I wasn't like an unknown, so they were happy to work with me. But when I pitched this idea, they all were like, no, this is too political. This is too divisive. And so what I wound up doing was just doing the show in the backyard of a friend of mine. It went pretty well. I mean, people were like, this is such a fun idea that you're doing it in a backyard. And I was like, yeah, fun in the way that no other venue wanted to be attached to this idea.
And did your friend with the backyard plan to host more events? I mean, did this become a regular thing?
Well, she wound up moving, sadly. So much for that venue. She wound up moving. But yeah, she loved it. Initially, it was just people that were local and around us. And then we got some press from Breitbart that was not in our favor. But for people who were not fans of Breitbart, they came out. So we had our biggest turnout for the show following that.
And Breitbart being that very right-wing conservative news outlet.
Yes, their angle was that we were trying to disenfranchise straight white male comics by taking spots from them. And I was sitting there thinking, I have a free backyard comedy show where I have 8 spots that are meant to highlight diversity. How am I disenfranchising anybody with my free backyard show?
So you relocated to Boulder County and started the Boulder Comedy Festival, and the more diverse lineup went over a little better here. Can you talk about why you think it's important to book comedians from different backgrounds?
I think it's really important because I think everybody wants to be heard and everybody wants to be represented. And I feel like with the shows that I do have people come up to me afterwards and say, I stopped going to stand up, or I don't typically come to comedy, but I really liked this because I got these different perspectives. And I feel like Boulder, while while it is overwhelmingly very white, which was a shock for us coming from, I grew up in New York and then I was raising my kids in LA. So then to come to Boulder, I was like, whoa. But
Interesting.
the people that I've spoken to in Boulder are very much conscious of that and feel like, okay, well, how do we make sure that everybody does feel heard and represented and there is a need for this? So I feel like we got a good reception from people.
Zoe, your kids are a big inspiration for you. What do they think of being the subject of your act?
Well, I mean, I don't name them specifically, and because there are three of them,
Yeah.
what we've talked about years ago, I had a joke about one of them throwing up in the mall. And my son was horrified. He said, everybody's going to know that I threw up in the mall. And I said, well, I don't say which kid threw up in the mall. I just say my kid threw up in the mall. It could be your brother. It could be, you don't know. And he was like, well, that's true. So they seem to be okay with it. I don't really run many of my jokes by them, and I don't name them or anything, but it is, one of those things where parents will come up to me and say, we had that happen. Like it was at a concert, not at the mall, but let me tell you the story. And so that's a nice thing, because when those things happen, you do feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the only person this has ever happened to. This is so terrible and isolating. But then you find out like, no, everybody's kid is thrown up at a very inconvenient, fancy location. And there's a difference between having one and having more than one. Because the parents of more than one look at the parents of only children the way the Navy SEALs look at the reserves. We appreciate what you do.
Parental comedy really seems to resonate with lots of people. I'm wondering why you think that is.
Oh, I think it's just super relatable. I think everybody has either, everybody's been a parent or they've been a kid, and they know that feeling. So, even if you don't have kids, you've had a difficult roommate or you've had a really demanding boss. So I try to draw parallels between those things so that I've had people say like, oh, I liked your comedy about your kids, but it didn't feel exclusively like you were a mom comic, because you try to make it relate to other things in other people's lives.
I know comics love being on stage, but for you, how does it feel to stand in the back of the room during a show that you've put together and watch the comedians and the audience have a good time at your festival?
It feels awesome, because usually these are comics where I've seen them in person or I've seen their tape and I think like, oh, they're going to love them. This audience is going to love them. So then I get really psyched when they get on stage and I hear their first laugh. That's phenomenal, because I'm like, yes, I knew it. So it's really fun to see all of that play out, because often, these are comics that are touring all over the place, but they might not have an opportunity to come here. And now these audiences, it's fun to get to share them with these audiences, and vice versa. The comics are like, these crowds are so good. Like, I know, Boulder is very nice.
Zoe Rogers organizes the Boulder Comedy Festival. Zoe, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you for having me.
The Boulder Comedy Festival is going on now through Sunday. You can find a link to the webpage in our show notes where you can check out the full lineup. That's it for us today on In the NOCO. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.